Hi, everyone. We're here today with Lars, and we're going to talk about astrology, of course, and metaphysics. And we don't really have a set subject to talk about. We're going to just expand freely into different things. We did have a bit of a chat before recording this video, so we're going to talk a bit about aspects, maybe lunation cycles, lunar mansions, but you may get more than this in this video. So um, for all of you who don't know Lars, because some of you do, we've actually made videos together before on Trying Time. Lars, how would you present yourself, and how would you um, explain your approach to astrology or your
Sure.
interest in astrology to the viewers?
Sure. Well, yeah, first I want to say thanks for inviting me to make this video. I think it's going to be really fun. And I guess, yeah, so my approach to astrology, basically, well, I don't know, that's a tough question to answer off the top of my head, but it's
Well, I
kind
mean,
of like,
obviously you started off from Hellenistic astrology, and then you kind of
yeah, so it's like I actually started with humanistic astrology, which is
hmm,
Dane Rudyard. That was when I was like uh, I guess a junior, senior in college. And so I started off with like I read like almost everything by Rudyard that I could, including his philosophical works and whatnot. And then at a certain point, I got into old medical astrology, and that led me into traditional horary astrology. Then that led me into medieval astrology, medieval Persian and Christian astrology, and then I went to Hellenistic, and then I went to Jyotish, and now I'm even learning a little bit just for fun about Tibetan astrology, which is like a synthesis of Indian and Chinese forms of astrology.
no, very
So
interesting.
yeah, so that's pretty fun. But I've been, I guess my overall approach, like what it says on my website is astrology and tarot for awareness, and so
Mhm.
I like to use astrology and then divination methods like tarot or omenology, and I do some stuff with the names sometimes, or whatever I can kind of sink my teeth into, and I like to use these kind of all of these side by side if need be, to just just bring to help bring awareness into people's lives who I'm reading for. So
So
what that
basically,
basically
your approach to astrology is basically the magician card.
The magician card? Yes, actually, that would be a good way to describe it. I sort of like I'm like a chef who's like sampling a bunch of
Right.
different spices, and trying to make a whole coherent dish out of those different spices.
Right.
Um, so the awareness factor there is that I really believe the highest use of symbols and divination methods is to basically make us aware, consciously aware, and so that we can be like fully honest with ourselves about what is happening in our life at a given period of time. And so that way, through that awareness and honesty that can come through these methods, then we can basically live more holistically and conscientiously and stuff. So it's like really, the more I tread the path of doing readings, the more mystical and divinatory I like to approach it, more oracularly, I should say.
Right.
So
Right.
that's kind of my approach, I guess, in
Definitely.
a
Well,
nutshell.
we kind of get this. Well, you need awareness. You need awareness. You need awareness. Like for everything, even subjects which are not metaphysical or esoteric in any
Right.
way. People are starting to speak about. Well, you need awareness. You need consciousness. You need to, you know, get your awareness flowing in that direction. Whatever it is that you're doing, and whatever it is that you're trying to understand, and people are starting to understand this. So it's obviously very important in astrology. But what I would kind of go into with you is something that I'm interested in, and maybe we can merge
Yeah, sure.
ideas in a way here. Now, I'm thinking. I'm working on hybrid astrology and developing it, and spreading it and whatnot. And one of my fundamental ideas with this style is to make it so that you can plug into uh, it, right? Plug into it any other esoteric, metaphysical, holistic science. So, for example, if you're a practitioner of Reiki, and
Okay.
you're gonna say, well, Reiki is my main thing, right? I don't know if I have time for astrology. Well, yes, you should have time for astrology, and here's something that makes it easy for you to plug in both of these together, right? This is just an
Okay.
example.
Yeah.
So I think based on the fact that you kind of like to mix so many things together, you kind of already have this approach. So
Yeah.
how would you say, for someone who is not studying something particular? Okay, I already have some form of astrology, which is not necessarily something which is specifically made for this to accommodate other things, or um, any kind of
Sure.
astrology, right? Western, Eastern, whatever.
Yeah. Hmm.
What are your advices for that such a person to kind of make astrology so versatile, whatever style of astrology they're studying, to make it versatile enough so they can use it in other areas and other
Yeah,
fields?
use it for anything. Well, yeah,
Right.
it's interesting because while you were talking, I was thinking about how we both have like an earth sign as our ninth house, you know?
Yeah.
So we have like this really practical, we both want like the practical approach to the metaphysical,
Right.
like kind of divine component of reality. We
Yeah.
want to make it usable, practical. So what came to my mind when you were phrasing the latter part of what you were saying there was that, let's say somebody astrology should be, you should be able to adapt it and apply it to any realm of life. So if you were an architect and you started doing astrology, or if an architect came to you for some advice on constructing something, either way, astrology is potentially a great tool to use to do an architectural design that might be more holistic. And it can be the most like simple idea of like designing. You could design, I mean, I know very little about architecture. I want to make that clear before I proceed. But in my mind, it's like, okay, if you were gonna build a house for someone, you might want to have all the planets represented in the house in some way, so that it has that appropriate mixture of the different components,
Right.
like. And if you contemplate the symbols in astrology, you could understand maybe better how to design a house that somebody could live in, and so that the energies would flow better. And in India they call that vastu, and
Vastu. Yeah. Exactly.
in Chinese culture I think it's feng shui,
Feng
right?
shui. Yeah.
That's the whole. So that all has a very astrological basis. You could get more specific too, where you actually are looking at the person's birth chart that you're designing the house for, right? And you might see, oh, they have an afflicted Venus. So how can I design the house to compensate for that afflicted Venus, so that the house encourages a healthy Venus,
Right.
right? It's not just about, or even a healthy Saturn if their Saturn was afflicted. You don't want to strengthen the malefic necessarily, but you want to make it healthy. You want to make it harmonious again. So,
Right.
so you could think about that for literally anything. Like food, cooking, designing a city,
Exactly.
um,
Yeah.
artwork. You could use. I actually in college, for my senior recital, I composed a 12 movement um, free improvisation. Basically, it had each movement had a little structure, but it was free improvisation. Um, and and I was a guitar major, and so but that was based off the zodiac. Like each movement was, I tried to capture the essence of the zodiacal sign.
Right. That's awesome. Yeah.
So I guess, yeah. Does that kind of make sense? Or?
It does. Yeah. Absolutely. Um, what I always try to tell people when astrology is not their main thing, because if your astrology is your main thing, look, you can get advice, you can get guidance, but at the end of the day you'll have to try out a lot of stuff. Some of it will be good, some of it will be not so good. You just have to try out a lot of stuff if you want to make astrology your main thing. But
Yeah.
to people who are like, my main thing is tarot, my main thing is Reiki, my main thing is feng shui, or whatever else,
Yeah.
I always tell them, simplify your astrology. Simplify your
Mm.
astrology. Don't go into, like, forget about the quindecile. You don't care about it. You don't want to know what the quindecile does, right? You don't want to know what all these things. You don't want to know if it's on this side or that side of the cusp. You don't want to know that stuff.
Yeah.
If astrology is your secondary thing, it's like, um,
Yeah.
for example, if you go to the gym and you want to sculpt your body in all these kinds of ways, then you have to pay attention to all this stuff and all that stuff. If you just want to get strong, well, just go there and lift stuff. If
Sure.
you want to be practical, if you want to, so um,
Right. You're not, if you're just bulking up at the gym, it's not the same as training for a marathon. Training for a marathon is going to require
right,
a lot more, probably a lot more work and discipline and planning than just going to the gym a couple
yeah,
times a week and
yeah.
just lifting some weights,
And besides that, like, many of the complications which are today in astrology are grossly impractical. Grossly
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Because when you look at a chart, you have all these things and all these mini aspects and all these cusps and all these asteroids and all the stuff floating around in that basket. And then you only have so much brain power. Like, you're the smartest dude in the world. You only have so much brain power. And now
Yeah.
all of that CPU of your brain, you're using it to kind of juggle all this complex stuff, when you could actually be using it to just focus on the essentials. You would get much more accuracy,
Right.
and much better at astrology. So that's what I always advocate. But anyway, let's get into the kind of juicier stuff, like the more profound metaphysical um,
Okay.
stuff. Hopefully, we're not going to bore anyone who was hoping to figure out what their Mars placement means by watching this video.
Yeah.
But so you were talking about the lunations and the lunar mansions.
Yeah.
What would you want to say about either of those?
Okay. Well, basically, uh, when I got into all the Time Lord stuff from studying ancient astrology, which is,
Hmm.
great for prediction and great for, providing insight and whatnot, what I finally realized was, like, okay, these are all great, but very few of them are cyclic. Very few of them show us a complete cycle. Okay. Like, very few of us are going to live past 120 years, which is the time it takes to run all the dashas of the Vimshotri Dasha system, right? It's like 120 years. And same with a lot of other Time Lord systems. Very few of them are going to give us something cyclic to work with. And so I started returning to the progressed lunation cycle, which was developed by Dane Rudyard, which basically starts when a progressed new moon occurs after you were born and then lasts about 30 years, 28, 29 years. And that can occur, unlike the Saturn return or something like that. This progressed lunation cycle can occur at any different point in your life, and usually, people go through 2 to 3 complete ones throughout their life. So there's really a lot to work with in the progressed lunation cycle, because we actually have the opportunity to see a complete cycle unfold in the person's life. And basically, the progressed lunation cycle, we're dealing with the two most essential pieces the of astrology. Really, we're dealing with the sun and moon, which are the essence of life. They
Right.
represent that, and we're dealing with the cyclic nature of time as we experience it in the third dimension. So and then with this cycle too, it subdivides into 4 and then further into 8. So you have 4 major turning points and then 8 minor turning points. And then if you wanted to get crazy, you could add in all these other minor aspects, and you could find all these different little tinier turning points in the cycle. But what's so cool about the progressed lunation cycle is that it's such a simple idea, and it refers to it really just charts the fundamental meaning of anything that's happening in life, because it deals with that so personal level of sun, which is our nature,
Hmm.
and moon, which is like our nurture, so the two components of the self, which
All right.
is are basically our soul and our personality, or atman and jivatman, and
So,
so on.
let me inquire further about this because this is really interesting to me. I haven't been paying enough attention to progress charts, even though, in my
Hmm.
life, when I look at the progressions, it all makes sense, right?
Yeah.
I'm just like, I feel like I really got a solid thing going with the dashas and the transits, where
Right.
that gets the job done, right?
Yeah.
But I will play around with progression sometimes, and this seems really interesting. So basically, from the time of birth, until the next new moon, you could have like 30 years, you could have like 2 years, you can have like 15 years until the next new moon, right?
Yeah. Like for me, mine occurred, and I'm still in it, when I was about two and a half.
Right.
So I'm coming up on actually the very last phase, for
So
example.
this opens up an entire discussion that this could easily take up this whole video and an entire series.
Yeah.
But for example, would you look at, so okay, if someone is born during the waning phase of the moon, and obviously
Hmm.
the progressed new moon is going to come a lot sooner, would you see that as, well, let's say it comes in like 10 years, let's say, right?
Okay.
Would you see that, how would you see that initial 10-year period of their life? Is that like a
Yeah.
completion from previous lives of a cycle, or something like
Well,
along these lines?
yeah, arguably yes, because we're always dealing with karma when we do anything with astrology. It's all
Right.
karma, as you know. And so, what Dane Rudyard recommends, even if you were born right on a new moon, or right, you know, well, no, if I guess if you're born right on a new moon, it may not apply in the same way. There's Okay, sorry. Okay, forget what I said. I'm gonna start over. So basically, like, let's say you were born in that waning part of that cycle, okay, and then in about 10 years, you're gonna have your first new moon while you're alive. So Dane Rudyard tells us to like go back to the new moon that occurred before birth,
Mm,
and to analyze that point, not the
mm,
not the full moon, but the new moon, because he
mm.
wants to look at the complete cycle there. So that new moon, and like where it occurs in the chart, what degree it's on, if there's any aspects to it, and looking at the chart itself and comparing it with the birth chart, right? That'll give you insight into like the meaning of this cycle that the person was born into and that they're completing before they start kind of their own more conscious individual journey at the first new moon after they were
Gotcha.
born. And so he really emphasizes looking at the Sabian symbols as well for these new moons, and for really a whole variety of stuff in the chart. Um, but the other point I wanted to get to, kind of in answer to your question, was that there's also a system of taking the 8 different phases, and looking at those as kind of like personality types. So the
Mhm.
phase you were born into actually says a lot about kind of the essence of your life and how it's unfolding. And
Right.
so
Yeah, definitely.
we've got, it's like a eightfold zodiac. You've got your sun sign, and you've got your lunation birthday, so to
Hmm.
speak.
Hmm. That's very interesting. So in hybrid astrology, I say that uh, there's this, in the lessons and in the textbook, whatnot, that, well, the sun is the expression of life, how life expresses through the living being, whereas the moon is how that being will experience life. So
Sure.
the projection of life and the reflection of life, right?
Yeah.
So it does make sense. Well, what's the distance between the experience of life and the expression of life? And then based on your experience of life, well, that's your character.
Well, that's
However,
part of it. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, well, I mean, of course, then there's all of the other planets, but I mean,
Everything in context. Yeah.
that's your most fundamental experience
Right.
of life. That's your most fundamental point of perceiving reality, which is your moon, right?
Yeah.
But what I wanted to say is with this technique of progressed moon cycles. So okay, so you get to the new moon, and then there's a new cycle beginning.
Hmm.
What would you say about, like, how would you connect that to the birth chart or to the zodiac, like the sign where that happens, the house in the natal
Yeah.
chart where that happens? What would you draw from that?
Yeah. So again, it's like find that new moon and then look at it. Um, you can, I like to look at actually a new moon chart because sometimes that new moon chart, even though it might just be like a few days after you were born or 10 days after you're born,
Hmm.
will really, will really speak out because the new moons are going to pretty much occur successively, um, usually successively, like the sign ahead of your sun and then ahead of that,
Usually, yeah.
so
But you
to
mean
me,
we need to look at the new moon after or before? Because I was
well,
looking
both.
both, right? Okay.
Yeah, you want, I mean, okay, so like, because the cycle you're born into that you're completing or whatever before you have a progressed new moon happen
Hmm.
while you're alive, right?
Right, right.
That's going to tell us a lot about like where you're coming from and how you've been conditioned by the past or whatever.
Hmm.
What karmas are sort of like completing in this particular cycle
Right.
that you were probably, most people are born at like an odd phase of it, not
So
at the
I
beginning
was
or.
just thinking that I have both of these new moons in Cancer. One of them is on exact zero, and the
Oh,
other
wow,
would
wow.
be later on. So it's on the summer equinox, the one before,
So
on the
before
summer
you were born?
solstice. Yeah, the one before I was born is exactly on the summer solstice
Yeah.
point, right? The zero Cancer, and then the other one is further down, 20.
Wow. Okay. So yeah, that would be significant because they're occurring in the same sign, for example. Like that's not something that always happens. That didn't happen for me, for
Mhm.
example. And so in that case, Cancer and your third house might be emphasized because that's your third house.
Yeah.
And so we're just thinking about it like we would any sort of astrological technique. Like what degree did it occur on? And for Rudyard, what Sabian symbol does that degree correspond to? That's going to be very important. And then, are there any planets, in your chart or in the lunation chart itself that are like closely aspecting or conjoined that new moon? And you can do this for all of the lunar phases in the cycle if you want to get like a
Hmm.
little more in depth, right? You can look at the full moon and do the same thing and so on.
Right.
And
So yeah, so I actually wanted to get to that. Like, what would you say about the full moon? So when
yeah,
that progressed moon reaches the full moon phase, what would you say about that? It's obviously a zenith, a culmination of the
right.
cycle. How?
Exactly. So, yeah, so Rudyard talks about that the full moon refers either to like the completion, fruition, or realization of what was birthed at the new moon, which we're usually not aware of
Hmm.
when it's happening. We become more aware at the full moon.
Right.
Or it refers to a dissolution of whatever was done during that first half and then something else happening. So, negatively, that dissolution could mean a major crisis that is experienced as a failure. But it's also more positively, it could just mean a break with the past, like seeing things clearly. For example, when I went through the new moon phase, I think that was when or no, sorry, the full moon phase. I think that was when I like dropped out of high school to go to college early and pursue music really intensely. So I like did all this stuff with music, and in a sense, that was kind of like the culmination of this 15-year period of time since I was a kid. I was always doing music as a kid, and then it culminated with me going to school and working on all this stuff. So sometimes it's not sometimes it's not that clear like what is happening, but the most important thing about humanistic astrology, which is Rudyard's astrology again, is about finding meaning. And so when I look back on what I was doing during that full moon phase, like working assiduously in college to give like a classical guitar recital and stuff. Okay. Um, and then when I look at what happened after that recital, which is where I got into astrology and sort of had a major shift in consciousness, which was during the next phase of the lunation cycle, what I see is like, okay, so everything I was doing with music was actually just a culmination.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't necessarily an end in and of itself, you know?
Interesting. Yeah.
So I could see that as like, oh, why did I completely shift my focus from music to things like astrology? And that full moon like makes me feel more like that's just what was meant to happen. Like it was just meant to be this culmination of my personal drives and ambitions and things. And then it was really just, the beginning of the second half of this cycle that I'm still in. So that's kind of like how it can be used, and
Nice.
the potentials for it are pretty vast. And I feel like, you know this is kind of what I'm probably going to be looking at it a lot more for people in the future.
Mm-hmm. That's a very interesting, and definitely opens up a whole bunch of things that I will be looking into.
Cool.
So yeah, that was very interesting. And the moon is always like, I feel that many times well, not necessarily I certainly don't do this, and obviously you don't either, but people in general, especially when they're learning astrology, they kind of rush into the other stuff, and they forget to, not that they forget, they just kind of figure out that the moon and the sun are not as important, being the first elements in astrology that you kind of find out about, including the ascendant, right? The sun, moon, and the ascendant. Well, they're
Yeah.
not so important. It's more important for me to understand what Neptune is doing, and that's going to tell me more of the profound stuff. But really, some of the most profound stuff you can see about a person will be shown by the moon in
Yeah.
various areas, obviously in prediction in the natal chart.
Yep. Definitely. I mean, the Indians and the Tibetans like are very moon centered in
Hmm.
their approach to astrology with
Yeah,
the tithis, the lunar mansions,
the
the
lunar
solar
mansion.
lunar yogas,
Then the dashas, of course,
the
are
dashas.
from the
Yeah.
moon as well.
Yeah, and
Um,
actually using nakshatras in the lunation cycle is something I'm looking forward to
mhm.
experimenting with as
That should
well.
be
Because
interesting. Yeah.
yeah, I think it'll be really interesting in addition to the symbols. So
So, besides this, you were also telling me about merging um, the Tajika aspects and
oh
the
yeah,
Graha
yeah,
aspects, something which on this channel I call the alignments and the projections. So,
right, okay,
um, you know, various other astrologers do have techniques of blending these two, but there are very few
yeah,
astrologers who actually use both of these, which
yeah,
is a darn shame. I, of course, advocate the full use of both of them, and I have my own recipe
right.
for how to. But what is your approach? How are you feeling that these two go together? How do you merge them?
Okay, yeah. So to give like a small like metaphysical background to the Tajika or more mainstream aspect doctrine used in the West that everybody knows and loves.
The
The
Western
base,
aspects.
yeah, the basic aspects. What I realized at some point is that from studying these old texts is like, there's this idea that the planets are always projecting these aspects, right? So a planet and a conjunction is not considered an aspect. A conjunction just is. It's just like
Yeah,
a merging.
yeah.
It's not a relationship. So if you have like a planet here, okay, as the focal point, it's always shooting two sextiles to either side, two squares, two trines, and then the opposition. So
Hmm.
that's 7 rays. And
Hmm.
in occult philosophy, we also have the 7 rays. They're in the Vedas. Their 7 is important in many traditions. I really love the way they're elucidated in the Sheikh philosophy, which is like an esoteric Islamic philosophy. They're really magnificently elucidated there for those who want to go, learn more about that. But I realize these aspects are a symbol of these 7 rays that the planets themselves are as well. The 7 rays that compose everything in reality. And so I was like, okay, Well, that's really profound, actually. And so I can't, because for a while I was kind of starting to ignore those aspects, but then I was like, no, I can't ignore them. Like, this is just too cool. Um, in the aspect doctrine in mainstream Jyotish, which originated in Yavanajataka and then changed a little bit throughout time, so that Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars have special aspects, because in Yavanajataka they don't actually, which is interesting. But there's also, I think when I counted, there's also 8 aspects there, because you have you have the opposition, you have the the Saturn sextile, the Mars square, the Jupiter trines, which are 2,
Yeah.
then the Saturn backward square, and the Mars eighth. So you also have 7 aspects there that every planet is projecting to greater and lesser degrees. But it's less harmonious in terms of like the symmetry. But but then what I realized is like, okay, maybe, just maybe, what Yavanajataka and the later Jyotish texts were doing was just to say that uh, there's a hierarchy to how powerful these aspects are, and this will allow us to basically to just grade influences of planets in a chart. And then when you get the special aspects of Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars, right, then those are just, again, it's like a way to sort of narrow things down so that when you look at a chart, you can just focus on that very simply, ignore the rest, right? Get the big picture, and then in what you and I are doing, or at least, this is how I'm thinking about it, bring in those other aspects like they are in Tajika, Hellenistic, Western stuff. So basically, like if I look at Mars, okay, Mars is still casting all the regular aspects, but according to the Indian methods, what you want to pay attention to the most are his square, his opposition conjunction, and his 8th aspect.
Right.
So it's not like, oh, the 2 aspect doctrines are totally, they're not compatible. It's more just like the Jyotishis are saying, we'll focus on these first because they're more powerful. And then if we need to, from where we stand, if we need to get into the more subtle stuff, we can look at, because like seriously, like a Mars in sextile aspect, like it's not a very powerful aspect by itself, right? If there's other things that make it more powerful, like if Mars is in a fixed sign and it's aspecting, like Aquarius, and it's aspecting a planet in Aries, that's more powerful because that's Mars's sign, right? So that's reception. But otherwise, if Mars was in, say, like Gemini, aspecting Leo, bisextile, I mean,
Exactly.
it's maybe not that important compared to like its square.
Well, I also advocate, this is just, I guess from personal preference, but also from some of the results that I've seen, I advocate use of the projections first and foremost. But then, alignments kind of have their own dimension. Like I kind of see all of these aspects, and there are different kinds, each functioning in their own unique dimension, and you can interlace their dimensions in various ways. There's not one way to cut it, but fundamentally I do see them as having separate dimensions. So the alignments, the squares, the trines, the sextiles work in their own dimension, which is more geometric, which is more sacred geometry. And then the projections are kind of, they're kind of more like, they're more like space-time. They're radial. I'm not sure if you still consider them like gradient aspects, degree by degree.
I think that, well, I do and I don't. I do both, I guess, because I think that the whole sign aspects are generally relevant, but then if it's degree based, it's like 2 to 3 times as powerful. So once again, it's like, what do I focus on, right? Like if Saturn aspects 4 planets in one sign,
you got to see those degrees. Whereas
I want to focus on the one he's aspecting closest first. Otherwise, I'm gonna have an aneurysm. It's
definitely.
like,
But
it's
then
too much information.
there's the other thing about the alignments and the projections. It's that in alignments, like you have to have that planet around that orb of, and you can um, have a bit of back and forth of what the orb should be, but you need to have them within that orb, and basically you need to have some part of a geometric form there, some angle, some geometric angle between them. So that's why kind of the alignments function in a more sacred geometry dimension,
Sure.
whereas the projections or the graha aspect, you don't need to have something there at all for them to be active. Like if
Right.
Mars's projection falls in the sixth house, and the cusp doesn't even need to be there, right? It's going to
Right.
impact that sixth house. The aspect doesn't need to meet something in its way for it to be fully active, right? So that's one
Sure.
thing about these aspects. So they're kind of, you know, if you, I think, again, going back to simplicity, if you have a simple yet strong, solid understanding of all of these aspects, then it's going to be much easier to use them in synchronicity.
Yeah.
Just,
Yeah. Well, to give an example, it's like if I look at uh, with horror area, I do things a little differently, but with birth charts and consultation charts, when I like first look at it, if I want to I just like to focus on the what you're calling well, what are you
projections,
calling it? Projections. Yeah, the
the graha
Jyotish,
aspects.
the mainstream Jyotish Graha aspects, because it's just less information. It's gonna give me like a really nice overview, things to focus on. And so, if you find um you find just the main influences that way that are going to speak very loudly. And then what happens though is, like, let's say you're looking at something and you find there's not really any aspects to that house or something by the
Right.
graha aspects. It's like, okay, well, is there nothing influencing this? Well, it'd be foolish to ignore the Tajika aspects, which are probably showing aspects, that we wouldn't otherwise see if we're just using those graha aspects. So therefore, they can kind of be like a refining quality. They can show a refinement
Hmm.
that might be otherwise not present. I remember looking at a woman's chart, and I think she had like Sun in Libra with K2, and I don't think anything else was really aspecting it. I could be wrong, but I remember thinking that there was an inferior sextile from Mars, which means that Mars was casting a sextile backwards against the order of the signs to the sun,
Hmm.
and that was the only significant, at least degree based aspect. And I felt like that made sense based on what she told me about her husband, like either based on his occupation or based on his behavior. And then, of course, K2 and Mars have a similar influence according to Parashara. So it gave a little bit more oomph maybe to that K2 influence.
Hmm.
Does that make sense? So it's kind of like I wouldn't have seen anything else
Right.
influencing the sun.
It kind of does, but then, with the whole K2 Mars, I kind of have a problem with that. Like, in some way,
Yeah,
K2
it
is
has its
like
problems.
Mars. K2 is like Mars if you're trying to explain to someone very simplistically, like how it's,
Exactly. I agree. Yeah.
but then it doesn't really, like, for example, Mars and K2 in Libra is going to be worlds apart from Mars and Sun in Libra, because then you have
Right.
Sun and Mars in Libra. Mars is not at its best there. Sun is debilitated in Libra, but
Right.
you get those two together, they're going to help each other. But what you have with K2 conjunct Sun in Libra is you have a debilitated Sun and hurt by K2.
Right.
So there are,
It is quite different. I agree.
yeah,
I think it was just more like you have two malefics hitting the sun,
right.
and you wouldn't see that Mars aspect if you were not using the Tajika aspects.
Yeah,
So that
definitely.
became more important in that chart, mainly because nothing else was really aspecting the sun. And another thing that a lot of people don't know too is that in Hellenistic astrology, where those Tajika aspects arguably originate, they were actually not only degree based, they were whole sign based. And then they didn't really have orbs the way they were developed in the medieval period. And then orbs got changed by modern astrologers. So we've had a few different incarnations of orbs, but what they did is they said that basically any planet applying within 3 degrees by conjunction or aspect, that was considered to be much more intense. And then the moon had a 13-degree range, so the moon was
Oh,
the
wow.
exception. Yeah, so I kind of follow something more like that when I use orbs. I don't have the patience to like add up, do what the medieval astrologers do and like add together the orbs of the planets and then divide by 2 and then find
Yeah,
this range. I'm just like, I just give me the simple like 3 to 5
exactly.
degrees. That to me just and with the moon as an exception. So
Well, what I advocate is use these aspects again, whole sign first of all. Like if you have a planet in Virgo and a planet in Capricorn, they're in a trine.
right.
Uh, or if you have 2 planets at opposite ends of Virgo or any other sign, they're in a conjunction. Now you just need to see how intense that aspect is, and
Right.
you got to narrow down the orb. But then, if you have a planet on the 1st degree of Virgo and another on the 29th degree of Virgo, and you
Yeah.
have another planet on the 27th degree of Leo, you'd rather pay attention to the one that's at the end of Virgo, even though it's further away. And for the
Sure.
trine squares, it's the same thing. So, it's kind of in more modern astrology. I'm not sure where that originates exactly in what time frame, but it's more about the orb. So it doesn't really matter for the modern astrologer what sign that falls in, as long
Right.
as the orb is there. Where I would strongly disagree with that approach. Uh,
Yeah.
you
I
need to
think
first have the sign, and yeah,
Yeah, well, because if you really examine the aspect doctrines, you find that they are based on the modalities and the
and the elements.
elements, right?
Yeah.
The planets in trine are in the trine
Same
is
element.
based on same element. So how can you really have a trine out of sign? It doesn't make philosophical sense.
Right.
I think there are cases where there can be an exception made, and the medieval Jewish astrologer Ibn Ezra actually like briefly mentions that in a book where he talks about out of sign aspects, but he doesn't I don't as far as I know, he doesn't really indicate like when it would be appropriate to use that. So I think we're just left to our best possible judgment.
So
You have to be
you know how I see the out of sign aspect. So for example, you have um, something. Well, then you can get into like, are they in the same nakshatra, for example?
yes.
You can get into all of that stuff. But just basically
Or is it an
fundamentally,
applying aspect? Like, is the planet going to move into the next sign and apply and make that perfect aspect that's currently out of sign?
yeah, that too. But just fundamentally, basically, um, I would say that an out of sign aspect is kind of like a soup without any salt and without any spice in it. Like it's there.
It's potentially there.
It's
Like, you could add the salt, but you
right, but
haven't.
it's not going to have much of an umph, right? You take that element or that
Yeah.
modality connection between those planets, like what is there? And you get to the sextiles are a bit weaker, and
Yeah.
they're not elements or modality, but the more powerful aspects, the most powerful
Right.
aspects
They're
are
gender. They're just gender.
right. They're just gender, but you still have a connection there.
Yeah.
But then you have the most powerful aspects, which are the oppositions and the squares, and their modality aspects, the modality of that energy, which is the most fundamental quality of that energy as far as I'm concerned. Then you have the
Yeah.
trines, which are fluent because they're the same element, they're the same
Right.
elemental energy. And then you have the inconjunctions, which are not, which
They have nothing in common.
nothing, no gender,
Yeah.
no element, no modality, no nothing, and
Yeah.
that's why they're not aspects.
Right, and those are called the 4 dark houses in
Right.
Hellenistic astrology. So from the ascendant, that becomes the second, sixth, eighth, and 12th. And those
Right.
all had malefic associations in the
Because
Hellenistic
they
period.
have nothing in common with
Right. So
that
they're
energy.
like blind spots to us because the first is, just our basic
Right.
us in the chart. And so it's like we can't see those. We can't understand those.
So basically, again, from a sacred geometry point of view, now, especially if you have something like a kite or a grand cross or a grand
Yeah.
trine, and it's out of sign, yes, there's a bit more to that then, because it's geometry
Right.
then. But if you just have a trine or a square or anything else, and it's out of sign, it's like it's there, but it's like I don't even know. Like I have something very, very exact in my mind that I perceive this as, but it's
Yeah.
a soup without any salt and
That's great. I love that. Yeah. Well,
that's
because
kind of
these are subtleties, okay? That I mean, it is very important if you had like Moon at 27 Virgo, applying to a trine to a planet at like the first, second degree of Aquarius,
right.
right? It is applying. So that I would count that, right? But with the caveat of what you're saying, that there's some disconnect there. It's not quite, it has to go through something. And so maybe that speaks to something in the person's life where there's a pattern in their consciousness where they have to go through some kind of weird, like, kind of anal process before they can connect to what that planet symbolizes.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
whatever, this is totally out of context, but
Well,
it's just like,
especially for example, if you have a planet moving out of a square, so you have two planets, and one of them is moving out of a square sign and into an applying trine in the next sign, right?
yeah,
So their angle, as per whole sign, they would be square, but their angle is the orb is very wide, and then
right.
it's moving into the next sign where it's going to apply into a trine.
So there's
Well,
some mitigation maybe.
there's some well, okay, so the energy is squared, there's no two ways about it. The energy
Yeah.
between those two planets is square, but then they're applying in a trine, like how, and there's we
Well,
can
it's
have all
maybe not.
about
It's
that.
like, yeah, it's like one of those things where my friend Sandra always says, like, if something looks good, look a little deeper. If something looks bad, look a little deeper. And that's like a perfect example where you might think, oh crap, it's like a whole sign square. That's really terrible. But then it's going to be that trine relationship soon. That might be something that makes it a little less difficult.
Mhm.
So we're talking about like very subtle adjustments where it's very easy studying older forms of astrology to like look at a chart and be like, oh my god, this person is fucked. They have Saturn retrograde in Aries right on the ascendant. They're totally screwed. Like,
Right.
there's no two ways about it. And then it's like you start to look a little deeper and you find, oh, but that Saturn's exalted in the Navamsha.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then you meet
Phew.
them in person and you realize, oh, they are screwed.
Oh yeah, and then yeah, right. Yeah, so
Well,
well, for anybody who watches this, you're definitely, you're not screwed just because you might have that configuration, but just speaking again out of context to
well,
illustrate the
again,
point.
definitely the divisional charts, and this is something which is not very popular in Western astrology. There are Western astrologers that play around with the
Harmonic
harmonics, but
charts,
then they use
yeah,
Placidus, and the whole house system in the harmonics is messed up. So
it is pretty messed up.
it is, oh my god, like so.
It's awkward, yeah.
But then yeah, the condition of the planet in a certain divisional can repair that in the natal chart. However, what I find is that, well, you have a debilitated Saturn in your ascendant in the natal chart. There's no two ways about that. You have a debilitated Saturn in your ascendant.
Absolutely.
Feel that. But then in the D9, and I take that as the more backstage kind of spiritual path and mission of the person's
Yeah,
spirit,
sure.
right? Then it's exalted there. Well, there's a spiritual plus, and maybe divine forces will intervene to
Providence, yeah.
yeah, eventually make this into a wonderful aspect. as for results overall. But then let's say, okay, so it's debilitated in the natal chart, it's exalted in the D9, so spiritually there's some purpose to this, and it may be fulfilling at the end of their life, all of this
Right.
trouble that they have to go through. But then again, in the D10, it's so well, your career is going to suffer because of that, right? So
Right. It might not
divisionals
be,
are,
yeah, it might not be as powerful for your career. If it, right. Obviously the,
right.
like
So so I'm
I
saying,
have a great Saturn in my chart, and then it's debilitated in the D10 actually. So
yeah.
it makes a lot of sense actually with my career struggles. It really does. So
So, for example, and Saturn is one of the main planets that you want to look at in the D10, right?
right. Yeah.
So, but basically, you want to say, well, I'm going to be screwed. I have this debilitated Saturn in my ascendant. Well, what is it? It's overall debilitated, and maybe your health will suffer. Maybe your overall confidence will suffer. Um, maybe, right? You have to. Is it going to suffer? Look at the divisional for health, the D30 and the D3 as well, to some extent.
Yeah.
Is it in a good condition there? That's probably not going to impact your health then, right? What is it going to impact? Look at the divisionals where it's not doing so great, for example. So
Right. That's a good point. It's a great way to use divisionals, and you can just look at the dignity. You don't even have to look at anything else.
definitely, absolutely.
To get that picture. But yeah, I guess two things I want to get to before I forget is wrapping up the aspect stuff is one like it's really Kepler who emphasized the geometric arrangement of the planets. He actually did away with the zodiac in his version of astrology. And so what a lot of people don't realize is that Kepler's contributions have been taken way out of context. And so a lot of modern astrologers have been influenced by Kepler without knowing it, and without knowing that his astrology was completely different. Completely different. No zodiac. Okay. So just geometric relationships.
Okay.
And then kind of moving on from that, um, and now we're getting into this kind of interesting space of like, dignity and debility, and like what's in the Rashi versus what's in something like the Navamsha, and so on, is that like looking at all of this stuff from a more humanistic perspective. Once again, I'm like, in revisiting my roots in humanistic, I'm seeing that like this isn't about, it's not about like predicting whether or not these things like will happen or have happened. It's not about well, what can I do to change that? Like I have the debilitated Saturn in my D10, right? I could sit here like racking my brain, like I'm screwed as far as career goes. Like, how do I change that? Like, how do I get around that? I want to have a normal career or something. I want to have a more
Well, what's your?
stable career. Well,
Let's
so
take.
what my point is that it's not, to me, it's not really about any of that. It's just it's about being aware of these energy patterns and the potentials they symbolize and signify, so that if you know that there's a potential weakness in one place, right, of your life, you can address that now with like awareness and honesty, not
Right.
necessarily to change it, right, but to understand it in the greater whole of your own existence. And
Right.
that's really the spiritual destiny component of life and astrology, right? It's
Mhm.
not about getting what you think you want. It's about understanding what role does this play in my life, because maybe you're not supposed to have like a normal cookie cutter marriage, or maybe you wanted to have kids because you actually, that's born out of a unconscious idea that maybe as a woman you're supposed to, right? But if you really looked at it, you might find actually, wow, I never really wanted to in the first place. And then the chart becomes so much more of a guide and an oracle rather than like a damnation or something like that. I think
Right.
it's easy to fall into this trap of like, I want to predict correctly. I hope my prediction comes true. But
Right.
really, I think what we should be hoping for as compassionate astrologers is hopefully this person has a greater sense of awareness and honesty that they can now meet life with, as opposed to a more ignorant, unconscious um,
Right.
approach. So
Definitely. Well, I kind of have mixed feelings, mixed views on this. On the one side, if you're just going to the astrologer and you have this problematic placements in your chart, and it's obviously causing some problems, and okay, these are the problems, like you go to the astrologer, what do I do about it? Now there's some
mhm.
things that the astrologer is going to help you with. They can help you with that. There's some things which the astrologer cannot help you with. It's up to you. And some of those things, as you say, you just need to go through them. It's just consciousness experiencing whatever it needs to experience in the grand scheme
Yeah,
of
we don't always know. We don't always know what,
right. What's the
you
grand
know.
purpose of that in the
Yeah,
grand scheme of things? um, but then I think where the balance, where the justice card lies, right? It's
okay,
first understanding you have time to do both in your life. You have time to first sit with that debilitated placement in your chart, or even that well dignified placement, because there's a lot of factors which could make um, a a dignified placement a problematic placement. Some I talk about,
retrograde and then that 12th or 8th house, stuff like that. Yeah,
yeah, among others, like for example, I
yeah,
have
oh yeah,
I in my textbook I give a method on calculating potential beneficial, auspicious and non-auspicious strength of a planet, and you'll find that I at least find that it's often very telling. Like you will have a very well dignified planet, like it's in good condition, the things in connection to those that planet are functioning great, only
right,
that they're not used to for auspiciousness. So for example, you have
right,
a strong Mercury, you're very intelligent, but then you use your intelligence to harm others or to cause harm to yourself in various ways, because that
right.
obviously
Like,
can happen.
I think Son of Sam had Mercury in Gemini in the eighth conjunct Mars, ruling a Scorpio ascendant. And I'm not sure if you know about him, but he was a serial killer in
But
the
what
like
dignity
80s
was
or
that?
90s. So
Scorpio
Mercury had,
ascendant
yeah, had good dignity,
in
right,
Gemini,
in
right?
Gemini. So exactly what you're saying. But Mars, there's a number of factors that go into it, but
Well, Mars would definitely go into that as well. But
yeah,
just because,
yeah, it's a
what I'm
day
saying,
chart too.
just, just because, and where,
I don't remember the whole chart, but I'm pretty sure it's a day chart. So
yeah,
Mars is more malefic and it's in the eighth, right? So everything you're saying is perfectly exemplified by that Son of
definitely.
Sam chart.
So again, you can have a problematic, um, ill-dignified planet and kind of be benefited by that on other things. Like you may say,
Yeah,
well, I don't have this extraordinarily good Mercury edge. My intelligence doesn't just snap on the spot on everything.
right,
But then that may be better for what I'm supposed, for what God has in mind for me. That may be
right,
better. Maybe I don't need
exactly,
to, right? Maybe I don't need to have this super uh, lusty Venus in my chart. Maybe I don't need that. And that, of course,
right.
is going to say that I'm not going to have uh, the best car, the best couch, the best quality, everything in my
Yeah.
house, right? Because in Indian astrology, it's always about the couch. Like I don't understand what it is about
Wait,
couch.
really?
Yeah, those yogas, those planetary combinations. This combination confers fancy couches on the native. Like,
Oh my God, I
what
haven't
is
seen those. That's funny.
couches and storied houses? Like they have some fantasy.
I've
Yeah,
seen elephants,
and well, you can kind of get that
having a
because
lot of elephants. Yeah,
cattle and elephants. Like, what is it about those couches, man? Like you guys were
you
really
got to
putting.
get that couch. Yeah,
Gotta get that couch, man. But yeah, there's like you won't have those things. You have a debilitated Venus or whatever, but then maybe you need less of that in your life. Look at the more
yeah,
dignified planets. Maybe you have a planet which would be, you have a powerful Venus in your chart, and maybe your divine purpose is something about um, the sun, for example, which is an enemy to Venus, and Venus is an enemy to the sun, and that would not allow for
yeah.
the sun to express to its maximum. So there's all those.
Right. Well, it brings me back to, like, again, the more awareness and honesty and, innate connection to the divine that you have and bring into your everyday life, the more you actually can really understand um the various components in your life that are maybe less functional or less mainstream, right? And the more you can actually attune yourself to what those are really doing. So like, for example, and in astrology, that's what we're calling those, debilitated planets, right? But a non-astrologer would just think, oh, I just have this difficult marriage life or something. So what I've noticed with like debilitated planets by sign is that sometimes in the charts of like really powerful or enigmatic individuals, they can just show that the person has like a radically unorthodox approach to what that planet signifies. And then why does that create trouble in their life? Because it's unorthodox, right? It's not in line with the mainstream. So there's some persecution around it. Like Sri Aurobindo's chart, he has fallen Mars in the 12th, and he has fallen Venus in the 2nd. And, when you look at his life, he's a revolutionary who gets put in prison for his revolutionary activities. Mars, Cancer, 12th, right? So
Right.
it's not like he was a like drunken, angry, dysfunctional, abusive person because he has Mars in Cancer. Like, that's just not how it worked out for him, because of course, other factors in the chart speaking to his overall
Right.
character and disposition and so on. But the point is like, when we can like it, but if somebody with that fallen Mars in the 12th, somebody else like thought they were supposed to be more mainstream, right? They might get a job and really hate it and feel really constricted by it and turn to like drugs and alcohol to escape, right? Because they're not actually living in harmony with what is shown in their chart by the fallen state of Mars or whatever. So that's an interesting.
And then I'm sure that, like, for example, Sri Aurobindo, when he was in prison, that was probably a source of great wisdom for him in many ways. Right?
He experienced samadhi. So
so there you have a debilitated planet in the 12th, and it's going to put you in prison, which is something which is bad, right? It's not nice to be in prison. But then where was his Jupiter? What is his Jupiter in his chart?
Well, his Jupiter is in Leo with the sun rising, but actually I think what really shows that samadhi is the moon ruling the 12th is with Ketu in the 5th. So you have Ketu.
So you have that samadhi with the 12th, and but then here you go. You have Jupiter in a good sign. It's with the sun, which is the soul, right? It's the sun is Mula Trikona. It's in the root sign,
right?
And it's in the ascendant, so that defines him. That Jupiter and Sun, that defines him.
That's the foundation for everything else.
He could have attained samadhi without going to prison, but somehow the universe thought, let me throw that debilitated Mars in the 12th house and send the sucker to prison.
Yeah, right, exactly. So that's just how it worked out for him.
Right.
And so I think it's like that with really any debilitated or even exalted, powerful planets. We have to look at like what is the natural flow of that position, not compare it and judge it against like a normal mainstream idea. I remember I saw on a forum once that some Indian Jyotishi was making this eccentric statement that debilitated planets show what you're doing wrong. And I thought, oh, well, maybe that makes sense. And then I thought about it, and then I realized very quickly, like, no, that doesn't make any sense. That breaks down very quickly, because that's a judgment against a certain moral, sociocultural mindset. That's like, you have Venus in Virgo, so it's your fault that you don't have a good relationship. Well, actually, maybe Venus in Virgo is not going to have a regular relationship. Forget the word good, a regular relationship, because maybe for that person, they are actually being, they're being asked, so to speak, or it's their destiny to actually like critically examine. Well, no, but to critically examine the implications of Venus, to break down the normal implications of Venus, to really analyze that and maybe sublimate it, maybe there's a whole slew of things. But the point is like, what is a healthy, just to give another example, like a friend of mine has like Jupiter in Virgo, and it's retrograde, and Jupiter's not great in Virgo to begin with, but I do find that that person connects more harmoniously with their Jupiter when they're actively serving others, like in a really mundane kind of way, like
Yeah.
serving them drinks or doing like
Yeah.
some kind of cooking for them, or like little ceremonies that they like to do, just things like this, right? So is Jupiter's not at home in Virgo, which means that, okay, yeah, that person's going to have to do more work maybe and go in like a more oblong direction to connect with Jupiter. But that doesn't mean that they're like forever screwed by that placement. There's no
Right.
reason to think like that.
Definitely.
And a lot of times astrologers do think like that.
Well,
So.
I mean, I certainly wouldn't want to see the soul planet or the ascendant lord debilitated
Well,
in
why
a
not?
chart. I wouldn't want to, like, I wouldn't want to be necessarily, not that I wouldn't want to be the one, because you can imagine I get these sorts of cases, and there's ways to work around that. But I wouldn't want to necessarily be the astrologer that has to give advice to someone with a debilitated soul planet or ascendant lord, right?
Well, but once again, I mean, it's
you could tell them, like, okay, if they present themselves and say, well, I want something from you, give me your astrologer's advice on becoming my best spiritual self. Well, I'm going to tell them, we'll see this debilitated planet, we'll just suck it up and take it, and it's going to be for your own good. But if they're asking me, like, this is what I'm coming to you for, like, I have this debilitated Venus and my relationships suck, and
Mhm.
I want a relationship, and this is the answer that I'm looking for, right? What can I do?
Right.
And there
Okay.
are things you can do, and basically that's what you're paying me for. I'm going to give you things to do, but I'm also going to tell you, look, there's a purpose to this, and then here's something that you can do. The thing is that many times they're not even going to do it, and it would help. And it's not that it's going to just do this and the next day Prince Charm is going to come up
Right.
at your door. It's going to be a long process, and you have to be mindful of many things, but
Yeah.
usually their spirit isn't even pulling in that direction to where they would do the things which would fix their situation. And one other thing that I
Yeah.
wanted to say about debilitated planets is that people with debilitated planets, in regards to the matters ruled by those planets, do act as if in previous lives they've been abusing the faculties, the indications of that particular planet. If you have a debilitated Mars, it's very likely that you've been abusing authority and assertiveness and violence in a previous life. And in this life, you're acting as if you're still abusing them, just that no one really takes you seriously because you have a debilitated Mars and no one's afraid of you. And
Yeah. Well,
right.
I guess it's hard for me to speak to that because I don't really try to think too much in terms of past lives when I read for people.
Mm-hmm.
So I've definitely like I have a good friend who has a debilitated combust Mars, and I understand like how it's worked out on multiple levels in their life. But I wouldn't necessarily say that I perceive that like in a past life they were like abusing Mars related things. I perceive instead that like a lot of the things that happened in this life have contributed to some of the anger patterns that they still hold on to, so
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I can always say for sure if it's a past life. I definitely think sometimes it is, and I think that requires like a finer grade of judgment than just a technique in the chart. Like I get a lot out of like talking with the person, hearing their voice, seeing their facial
Definitely, yeah.
expressions, and I think every astrologer or reader does, even if they don't realize it. We're always
Mm-hmm.
taking that in on
No,
a more
absolutely,
subconscious
yeah.
level. And
Definitely.
so this is where too, like I use some more unorthodox methods to kind of ascertain, um like if a person comes to you and they have a debilitated Venus, like you were saying, and they're like, I
Mm-hmm.
want a good relationship, my relationships suck, right? Well, just by them being so upfront about that and whatnot, you already kind of get an idea where this person is more focused in life, right? They're probably not, whereas a person who came with that same debilitated Venus another person might say like, I'm working really hard to sublimate my sexual desires and drives, and it's not working, or it's I'm having a hard time doing it or something.
Mhm.
Those are completely different types of people with different focuses in life, right? So you
Right.
treat those differently. The person who wants a good relationship, well, now we're going to look at that Venus and say, okay, so what is like the main thing here about this Venus and about the chart that's preventing them from getting a good relationship? Maybe they keep dating, if they're a man, maybe they keep dating women who are unavailable.
Right.
Like they keep being attracted to women who are like in a relationship or who are not very sexual or something, and they keep and not very romantic in a traditional way. So they keep trying to romance them according to like all the stupid movies in our
Right.
culture and or whatever, and it's like not working, and it's like, okay, well, but these are not women that are going to be interested in getting like a box of chocolates and walking on a sunset beach kind of thing. They maybe want something more Virgo-esque, right? So
Right.
there's so many ways to approach that harmoniously, where you're looking at the whole picture and saying like, yeah, what how does this planet symbolize an imbalanced flow of energy, and how can we as providing counsel, how can we help steer this person in a direction to like reestablish the flow? And of course, in India and Tibet and other ancient cultures, they might prescribe like a mantra or a sadhana or a gemstone or whatever. And that is something a lot of people are getting back into. But I myself am more, I'm more, I guess because I'm more influenced by like Advaita and Vajrayana Buddhism and stuff like that. I tend to believe that people can just do it through awareness, and they don't necessarily need to. We don't need to be reviving, in some cases, very archaic cultural practices that don't make any sense within necessarily a Western context. So.
Right.
That's just kind of like my opinion, even though I study this stuff, and I myself chant certain Sanskrit mantras here and there if I need to, but I also acknowledge that most of my clients are not going to be down to chant Sanskrit because they don't have that consciousness of being attuned to Indian culture.
Well, that also goes to
it's just not. So
your savviness, kind of your awareness as an astrologer to figure out, okay, so hearing their voice, seeing their face, seeing how they talk, how they behave, kind of who's like in a real sense, who's the person besides the chart, who's the person. Like if I tell them to chant this mantra, are they likely to? Well, you can try it and tell them to, but you can't expect them to. So you're better off giving them some more suitable advice.
Exactly. Yeah.
But what I would say, a few points that I want to make based on what you said. First of all, with kind of the planets showing past life patterns, I believe that it's always a continuation of the past life.
It is, yeah.
Right. So I do not really see any other scenario than the one where this life is a continuation of something from the past. So inevitably, if you have some problem with some planet, that's the accumulation of some positive karma, right? Perceived positive karma, and the other way around.
But how do we always know? But I mean, how do we always know that it was as simple as like the person was abusing or not abusing?
But then again,
that planet symbolizes.
But then again, we can't know exactly what was the situation. So based on that, okay, you have a debilitated Mars. Maybe you were abusing something in regards to Mars. Either you were in a war, or you killed many people, or you were just smacking your son's teeth out for not washing the dishes properly or something.
Sure.
But.
Yeah, these are samskaras is what we're kind of talking about.
Exactly.
The
but the samskaras have form. Now, if we need to really know exactly what was happening, astrology is not the tool to get you all the way to having the image of what was happening, right? To actually seeing the situation of this person doing something horrible to someone, abusing their Mars. But it does hint, it does show you where were they abusing, where were they doing something wrong, because you look at the planets which are problematic in this life. And
Yeah.
then you know, well, they were doing, and if you were steering them into past life regression, then you would kind of know where to steer them more, but it's more up to them to actually realize what those things were. Or you could also see them if you have that kind of awareness, that kind of a brow action going on.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a little bit more,
But however, what I wanted to say is
okay,
that
I'll let you finish it. Sorry.
generally when I speak to clients, I don't even mention the past life. So maybe in the
Okay.
past life you were this or that. That's just
Yeah.
something that's going through my mind. And many times if the clients ask me, well, does this mean that in the past life this or that, because many people have this idea, and I would generally say probably, but that doesn't matter to you right now. That's not what you need to know. Like, what are you
Yeah.
going to do with that information? You're going to do nothing with that information. You just need to know what you can do in this situation.
Yeah, so
So, yeah.
that's similar to like what I would tell somebody too. And I'm
Yeah.
maybe a little bit more in some ways radical, where I don't care why you have this imbalance necessarily, unless it's actually going to help you confront it and like transmute it. I just care about like what is the imbalance, and like how can a person like correct the imbalance so that there's flow again, you know?
Hmm.
So like a lot of people, you know, people do this all the time in our culture. It's like, oh, I'm so sad because my father was abusive, or like I spent 7 years with this boyfriend and it just didn't work out, and I'm just so sad, and like I hate everything, I'm miserable. And so it becomes like an excuse to be miserable. It's like, okay, so these shitty things happened and it's the cause of your misery. All right, great. So why are you still reliving that? It already happened. Like, you know, there's that mantra, so hum, which basically means so what? You know,
Hmm.
just so hum. Like get over it. Like let's get over it and be be more fulfilled and more conscious. And you know, it's not, I'm not saying like, you know, people don't like to hear things like get over it. I like recognize that I'm not gonna just say that to a client. Okay, like I'm not stupid, but the point is like, if I'm honest, that is what's going through my head, and that's how I live my own life. Like when I find myself getting like sad or like regretful or guilty about something, I'm like, just get the fuck over it. You know,
Yeah.
so hum. Okay, like it's
Yeah.
not, we can be compassionate with ourselves and say, okay, yeah, I was being really stupid and I said that thing or I did that thing, like, and then laugh at it, because if you laugh at it, it has no power over you, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Make
So
fun of the situation. That's kind of the best remedy for anything. You can't get a girlfriend, laugh at yourself. You can't, you
yeah,
can't use your Mars properly, laugh at yourself, laugh at the situation.
right.
Like that's the best thing to do. And what you actually do when you take it in this way, when you can be amused by it, it's not like it's that easy. Sometimes you just can't be amused by it. Like sometimes life will press you in such
Sure.
that laughing is not quite the thing that you want to do or that you can do. Is more about
Right.
realizing things, right? So,
Right.
but then if it's a cyclic thing and it's something that is not like pressing you really hard, it's just a thing that isn't quite going well, then just laugh at it, just accept it, and whatever. Like there's other things which could be good, which could be considered as good.
Yeah, and actually on the subject of laughter, especially in the face of tragedy, I have found that I found pretty consistently that people with debilitated Jupiter have a really hard time with that
Laughing.
one.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially
So
at tragedy. Okay,
this is
like because I have laughed at some pretty politically incorrect things to
oh
laugh
yeah,
at, because not because they were funny in and of themselves,
right.
but the absurdity of it is funny, and that's why I like that show South Park,
Hmm.
because it's always doing that. It's always making fun of like how fucking stupid these like horrible things are, in the
Right, right.
sense that like why is there room for this to happen? But debilitated Jupiter is really, it's interesting, and I haven't found this with like combust planets are not like, that's a different form of
Yeah, it's totally different.
affliction. But I'm talking about like, you know, the kind of big time, like, yeah, Jupiter uh, I don't know, like being not having sect, and then being occidental and being in a sign it just doesn't really feel comfortable in, and in a house that's difficult. Like a few things kind of compounding to
Right.
show like a Jupiter that's being like kind of strangled or
Right.
something like
Well,
that.
many
So,
times, many times I think to myself, like I'm just randomly talking to people and I find myself laughing, and then and in my head I'm going, "What the hell are you laughing about? It's not even supposed to be funny." And I'm like, "What am I laughing about? Like, why am I? I must seem like some, you know,
I know, and then you have to like keep it quiet because like the person might get offended,
yeah,
you
but
know.
yeah, but
You're like,
usually I don't.
oh.
Usually I just laugh. I don't do that. Either I laugh or I don't, right? But usually I just laugh, and I'll think to myself, "What am I laughing about?" And I'll just continue laughing either way. But so
Cool.
yeah, about Jupiter, it's kind of interesting. I was thinking now, as you were talking about this, that Mercury is humor and Jupiter is laughter, and there's this whole thing about Mercury and
Oh,
Jupiter,
okay.
how they come together for manifestation, right? They rule the dual signs, which are, I don't know
Yeah,
if you've picked up uh,
the Gemini
Muhurta
stuff.
Muhurta by
Oh,
Balaam.
no, I haven't yet
He
actually.
mentions how in the dual signs there are these four openings from cosmic openings of energy and consciousness. They're
Oh,
only in the
cool.
dual signs, and then Mercury and Jupiter rule these
Yeah,
all of these dual signs, and Gemini considers them the planets of manifestation. So if
right.
reflection falls on these houses, it's going to manifest. So that's a very interesting dynamic between Mercury and Jupiter. There, just got my brain juices going on that one.
Yeah, and I think yeah, in my I did an article on Rahu and Ketu for I Am Infinity Astrological Magazine, and I quoted this passage from one of the Upanishads. I forget which one, but it's basically like, something to the effect of, you know, by joy everything comes into being, by joy everything, or no, it's delight, it's by delight everything comes into being, by delight everything exists, and to delight everything returns, or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then Sri Aurobindo talks about that in one of his books, and like it's just such a cool concept, because it's like here we're talking about, humor, like the wit of humor Mercury, and the laughter of Jupiter, and they're the manifesting planets. And then you have
Yeah,
in the Upanishad this delight, this like divine delight, joy, laugh, which laughter is, there's a saying, laughter is music to creators ears. So
right,
you
right.
really have that basis for manifestation, and for sattva
Mm-hmm.
is yeah, that delight, that laughter.
And then the dual signs are the sattvic signs as well.
Right, right. Yeah, I'm writing a bit about that, and it's funny because I take it as, yeah, sattva for mutable signs, and then tamas for fixed, and rajasic for cardinal. But in Parashara, he gives like a really strange, different arrangement for the signs that
Hmm.
doesn't really have a coherent pattern. So, but I just don't. It just doesn't make sense to me. So
I tend to
yeah,
like I've looked into Parashara a lot,
yeah,
especially in the beginning where when I first got into Jyotish from Western astrology, and okay, but Jaimini just seems wiser. Like, bottom line, the Jaimini just seems like he's got that whole halo
I
action going on,
I would agree. Yeah,
and Parashara seems like the difference between a master and a teacher. Like Parashara seems more like a teacher, whereas Jaimini seems a proper master who actually understood the fundamentals
yeah.
of astrology.
Well, I don't think the text that we have, Brihat Parashara Shastra, I don't subscribe to this idea that it was necessarily written by the sage of the same name.
Hmm.
Because it's supposed to be a conversation between the sage Parashara and his disciple,
Mm-hmm.
and that's kind of how the book is written. But I don't. But I really believe that the sage Jaimini wrote Jaimini Upadesha Sutras for a number of reasons. But I don't necessarily think Parashara Horus Shastra. Maybe pieces of it were, but I just don't think it was written by the sage of the same name. It's actually a much later text than Jaimini. And there's kind of an odd tradition in India of sacralizing the astrological texts, meaning like lifting them up to this like level of that
Yeah.
somehow they're just as divine as like the
The
Vedas
Vedas.
or Upanishads or something. um I don't really dig that. I think they're, for the most part, they're just manuals. They're not these like
Mhm.
sacred holy gems. And in Tibet, I really don't get the vibe that the Tibetan yogis make a huge deal out of astrological texts and stuff. I think they just use it very practically and matter of factly,
Mhm.
and they really just like
Well,
they're
here's
more
the thing.
concerned with
Most
liberation.
texts,
So
yeah, most texts that I've read on astrology, um, are exactly that, as you say. There's a manual, there's information in there, there's technique in there, there's insight in there, there's profundity, there's some more
yeah,
superficial things, there's some things which are very humanly explained, right?
yeah,
um, but this is where I would separate. Now this is just for me, this is where I would separate Jaimini from all of this. Like
I
Jaimini,
agree. Though I agree. Yeah,
I would put Jaimini with the Vedas easily, because that text, those sutras, like, he gives a certain, like, he obviously doesn't give all of the combinations possible in the world. He doesn't give all of the information that he
no,
could in the world. He gives limited information, but within that text, there is, you can, by understanding, by studying, by contemplating that text, you can open up all the doors that you need in astrology. All that you need about to know about astrology
yeah,
is in those texts, and it's so beautifully codified in
yeah.
minimalistic information. Is just beautiful to me.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the thing that separates Jaimini, like you're saying, or another piece of it, is that like it's like the way he writes, he wrote that, like the space he wrote it from is not just a mere like human intellectual space. It's more of a transcendental space. And so it
Right.
seems like working with Jaimini's techniques and ideas and sutras like actually opens subtle channels in the heart and mind to like that allow us to like pick up things that are not uh, like linear. it's
Right.
it's that weird, it is more mystical for sure. But yeah, I don't really find that with any other text. I think these texts are all great and stuff, but um it's really fascinating seeing like the kind of like Persian Islamic astrologers, the way their texts are versus, and the way they're regarded versus the way the texts in India have come to be regarded as like somehow they're on the level of sacred texts now. It's so different because like in the Islamic tradition, you just get the sense that like nobody thought that these books were anything like the Quran.
Right.
Even the stuff written by like the high Sufi mystics on astrology, like no one ever was like, oh well, this is like just as good as the Quran. It's like no one ever thought that.
Right.
And I just don't see how. I don't know. It's
But then
that's a
again,
little strange to me. So
in India, they have this plethora of ancient text, uh, that is like, you all the way from the Vedas. Then you have astrological texts, but you also have like texts on various things. You have texts on, I don't know, palmistry, vastu. You
yeah.
have texts on vakshuddhi. You have texts on um, various things, and they probably all consider all of these texts as sacred in a certain way. I guess that's just the Indian culture, and the truth is that
Well,
they do have a lot of of that essence in
it's some of the Indian culture. I don't think India is such a diverse place,
right.
and has so many different varying viewpoints and stuff. I think that's a particular sect of thought that's emerged probably in the past 100 to 200 years. And I just really think astrologers and whatnot in the West or East, they in this day and age they take themselves way too seriously. Like
Mhm.
I do my best to not take this too seriously what I'm doing. Like I take it seriously in the sense that I want to get into a space where I can be like a conduit for aiding the person. Okay. but I don't take it seriously in terms of like what I'm doing, like me, Lars,
Right,
like
right, right.
I'm just a messenger is how I want to look at it. And so you do find like the ones that take themselves the most seriously are like the EA guys, the evolutionary astrology school, which I just can't get into for a
Right.
number of reasons, but they take themselves so freaking seriously. It's like, it's okay, guys, it's not that big of a deal. Like,
Well,
just chill
okay,
out.
so here's the thing. Like, what gets my Jupiter laughing a lot is the attitude of astrologers and the uptightness of astrologers. Even like, I'm
Yeah.
close-minded in many ways because I have that Saturn in my ninth house in Capricorn. But it's like I'm not that I love debating more than anything, but I'm not so uptight about things. Um,
Right.
and I love supporting my point of view to the end of the world, even. But it's not like this attitude of astrologers, like acting like you have some secret of the universe that
Oh
God
my
just
God.
gave to you, and you're like,
Yeah.
and many times I get called out on being arrogant and whatnot because my attitude is fundamentally like, this is what I think about astrology, and this is what astrology is, and most of you people should know this because it's not that complicated. It's over the top of anyone. It's fairly simple if you don't
Right.
want to act all mysterious and moony about it. Like
Yeah.
it's just another uh,
It's just a
metaphysical.
tool. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just a metaphysical tool. It has some math, some rational math in there. It has some divinatory potential in there. All mixed up. It's nothing.
Yeah.
So to act like, oh, I'm an astrologer, I'm going to, there's this whole attitude, and it kind of bothers me when I see that, especially with astrologers that don't know what they're talking about. Between you and me,
Oh
like
my
whenever I
God.
see that,
Yeah.
it's like, dude, like
Yeah.
it's astrology. The whole thing is that humanity is in such a horrible shape that they
Yeah.
don't understand astrology. Not that astrology is that special. Uh, it is
Yeah.
special, but I mean the
It's
level.
right.
So astrology could be very special,
Right.
but at the levels that we're practicing it right now, that's kindergarten level astrology. As you were saying, don't take yourself so seriously. But
Yeah.
1,000 years from now, we'll be laughing at the astrology that we are practicing today. So,
I think so too, and I think the most advanced astrologers I've ever heard about are the Nadi readers who like use those esoteric palm
hmm,
leaves that were supposedly written by Lord Shiva,
hmm,
and but they also incorporate astrology and palmistry and stuff, and then
right.
probably the high Tibetan lamas who are practicing it as well. And what you find when you like read about these kinds of readers is exactly what we're saying. They don't take themselves so seriously. They take what they're doing seriously and they devote
Exactly. Yeah.
themselves to being good at
That's
that so they can serve people, but they don't take themselves so seriously. And
that's
a
the
lot of
distinction.
times those readings, by the way, are like 10 minutes long, maybe. Like they're just like a
Yeah.
very short, it's like, but if you could tell somebody in 10 minutes like the whole essence of their life, then it doesn't need to be like an hour to 2 hours and this whole kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I just want to also say that this is a video that you're going to put up, I want to say too that I don't support, I'm not impressed with the naughty readers who are now charging like hundreds of dollars for their services. Like there's this whole thing where they've made like a big worldwide business out of naughty reading, and when there's still probably places in India where they're charging you like $5 to
Hmm.
do this, so
Yeah. Well,
that's a whole nother topic, but I just
this is
the
this is one of the reasons why I'm really trying to push and advocate that this is the age of Mercury that we're going into. But that's a topic for another time.
not the age of Rahu.
Not. I mean, eh, I don't know. I wouldn't give Rahu an age to begin with,
Okay.
right? So at the same, uh, would you give Rahu as a Charakaraka? It's kind of the
No,
same
I
question.
don't. I don't.
Would you give Rahu an age? I wouldn't give Rahu an age.
Well, I
But then
just
again,
joke about that because we're just in such a Rahu-esque period of time.
definitely. But it is if you would take one of the more the traditional planets, right? Which one would like? I would
Yeah,
definitely.
probably Mercury.
I'm biased, of course, but I mean, I would definitely see how Mercury is like all over the place right now.
Yeah, I would take Mercury, and I would probably confine myself to actually the five starry grahas because I don't the sun and moon. I
Yeah.
don't know that those could like rule an age, but
Well, if you have that age where you have humanity at its highest level of consciousness, I guess you could kind of give that to the sun, couldn't you?
yeah, yeah. So I don't know, maybe like a high mental world, kind of
Yeah.
where people are mostly living in the higher mental
Yeah.
world, something like that.
They're no
Um,
longer physical bodies; they're just essence
but
flowing around.
yeah, I mean, I actually on a another can of worms is like what to charge for readings, and I have I have played around with my prices a lot, and I still don't fully feel satisfied with how I'm charging. I acknowledge that it may just be a limitation of the digital age and how our economies are
Hmm.
that I have to charge a certain way, but I don't really understand some of these astrologers who are charging like hundreds of dollars an hour for a reading. I just I don't know. I just can't really
You know what?
dig it.
So I kind of play around with the prices as well a lot, and sometimes
Uh-huh.
I go, for a week, low prices, everyone get a reading, and that's where when people flood in to get readings. I don't know if people on my social media got used to that, and they're just kind of they're eyeing out that period, because obviously I get way more readings when I lower the prices, whereas when I lower the prices, like, people will get readings for the silliest stuff, Whereas when I raise prices, people will get serious readings, like for stuff that is really important to them, and they're ready to listen. This is a big difference
That's really interesting.
between getting a reading because, oh, hey, okay, it's a discount, let me just get a reading. I've been thinking about getting a reading. I don't even, and
Right.
I often ask them, okay, so what would you like to talk about in our half hour or 1 hour session, because I have these two. And they're like, I don't know, I was thinking maybe a bit of this and a bit of that. And it was like, they don't even want to know anything in particular. Like, they're not worried about anything. They're not pressed by anything. They just saw the discount and, well, let's just get that reading, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Whereas when you charge more, and of course I usually charge more based on the time that I have at my disposition, but at my disposal. But then when you charge more, people come to you with the people that do come to you come with things that where they really need help, and then where your input is really, you feel that your input is appreciated, right? Because first of all, they paid that money, and they feel that they've paid that money, and they're going to pay more
Yeah.
attention just based on that. And then to
Sure.
begin with, they only spent that money because now they really have a problem which you have the solution to, and they need that solution from you. So
Yeah.
in a way, there's kind of balancing out between these, where I would love to just charge less and have people with genuine concerns come to me so that I can help them, because I have a Virgo moon, and I need to help someone. I need to feel that something that I said is useful. Otherwise, I'm
Yeah.
not
Okay.
satisfied, right? If I just went through your chart and I told you all of these things, and I told you what your sole purpose is and what you can do to fulfill that, at the end of it, you're kind of like, okay, that's interesting. I'm like, screw you. Like, it's that you're supposed to be like, aren't you interested in this stuff? So
Sure. I can understand that. Yeah.
there is this kind of thing. And of course, then I have Venus and Mercury in Gemini in my second house. So I'm not really, if I could get people to come to me with charging $1,000 per session, I would probably charge that. I'll be honest with you, and I would lower my prices every 2-3 months, just so that people who can't afford it but have a genuine problem can come to me either way. Because then what I also do is I offer a ton of support. For example, if you go on Instagram, right, I post stuff
Yeah.
there, and people just, well, I'm going through this. These are my placements. Help me out. Or I have these live videos on Instagram where I just talk to people. They share their
Yeah. Okay.
so I help people for free a lot. But then when it comes
Right.
to
Okay.
right, when it comes to my undivided attention, gee, I would charge 10 grand if I could for that. But I also help people for free a lot. So
Yeah. So no, that makes sense to me. I think it's not my my squeamishness around this whole thing is not necessarily based on like price alone. It's based on like what I see astrology, what astrology has become, and then
Yeah,
why the prices are the way they are in certain cases. In a lot of cases, it's like astrology has become sort of like a cheap thrill, like a cheap form of entertainment, and like
right.
for a lot of people, like a quick way to make a buck. And so,
Yeah, absolutely.
um,
Yeah.
I see like these heavy duty, some of these prices, and I'm just like, I don't get it.
Yeah.
I don't know. But
Well, to be honest with you, like I'm
maybe that's
watching
just my problem.
I'm watching, and now this is not to be dismissive of other astrologers, but most astrologers that you see on YouTube, that they have a website, and it's like with most other things, the vast majority of those of the people working in a certain sphere are not going to be that competent, right? And then, as you say, you look at some of these prices and you think, well, my God, based on what the person is talking about in the video, all they can talk about in the live session is basically washed down stuff, and they're just going to make stuff up based on a trine or something in the person's
Yeah.
chart, and they're going to tell them nothing of value. That person is going to be um, have to thank divine intervention if something of value gets through the astrologer to them, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And in many cases that does happen, but that doesn't really justify the prices at all. So you are right in
Well,
that regard.
and maybe again, this just might be more to do with me and not to do with anyone else. But I also just, it doesn't work for me to like do a reading and confine myself. As I mentioned in the beginning, the magician, or you said the magician card, was like,
Yeah.
it doesn't work for me to confine myself to just the birth chart alone and then offer like a birth chart reading, because if I'm advertising a birth chart reading, which I don't actually advertise that, I then it's like you got to go through like each and every house or each and every planet, and I just find that doesn't really work for me. It just makes me feel like I'm putting the universe in a box. And so my approach is more, this is a reading. It's not about the astrology or the tarot or the palmistry or whatever I'm using. It's not
Right.
about that. It's about getting the information that you need right now. For one person, that could maybe happen in 10 minutes. They might just want to know, hey, am I going to win this court case?
Mm.
Right. And you're like, it doesn't look like it. And then they're like, okay, well, now I know how to proceed so that I'm not wasting more time and more money. That could take 10 minutes or less. For
Yeah.
another person, it might be this big thing of like, I just don't understand where I'm at in my life. And I'm like, I'm grasping for straws. I've tried these things, blah, blah, blah. And that might require like an hour to 2 hours, So it's
Oh
really
yeah.
about the information, not about like, oh, I'm going to go through all your planets and all your houses, because that's just a symbol. Those things don't
Yeah.
exist. They're
Yeah.
not
Exactly.
real. They're just symbols.
But
So that's my
that
struggle.
that's also a thing. Yeah. And for example, if someone comes to me, well, I have this issue, should I book 30 minutes or an hour with you? And I could do it in 30
Yeah.
minutes. I just say, well, go for 30 minutes. We don't
Oh, okay.
spend an
Okay.
hour, because I don't want to spend an hour with you if there's nothing to talk about 1 hour. I hate doing that. I hate mumbling
Yeah, me
about
too.
nonsense where I could just cover everything that you need to know, and that really serves you in half an hour, just sitting there mumbling, oh, okay, and then you have this sextile here, well, this means that. And I obviously don't do that. And then
Yeah.
what I
Yeah.
what I will do, because I despise that even more, what I will do is I'll go into more profound stuff which is over their heads, and that's not going to be really useful. Well, it's fascinating when you're talking about
Right.
it, but it's not going to be useful because it's a bit over your head, and everything which you really need to know I given you in that half an hour. So
Yeah.
there's that as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, I recently had a person who wanted to get a reading with me, and they were wondering if they felt like they didn't need an hour, maybe we could do a shorter amount of time, and like what would I charge for that. And I just felt like, well, I still am going to charge my base rate, because actually we don't actually know how long it's going to take. Like and that was my judgment, because it felt like it was going to take more than like a half an hour or like
Right.
20 minutes. And it did. It actually, it spanned like a little more than an hour, which didn't surprise me, because there was just a lot of things to look at. So, there's that problem too. I guess my ideal thing would be, but it would probably only work in person, would be like somebody comes to me for a reading and I just tell them like the price is just going to be what I ask for after the reading,
Right.
like it's just whatever feels right. So if we do like a 10-minute reading, but it was like really profound, I might say, like $30 or something. If we did a 10-minute reading and I didn't think it was that great, I might be like $10,
Right.
so it's not really about the time. It's really about the quality and what energetically and intuitively
Right.
feels right. So that would be my ideal. That would be my Venus ruling my second house in Aquarius with
Right.
Rahu. That's
Right.
like my,
Well,
very idealistic.
then there's, for example, there's the kind of clients that, okay, they need that information from you, but they also need to express their problems, to speak them out.
Right.
So you have the kind of clients that they do most of the talking there's two kinds. The ones that just
Yeah.
lay back and they want to hear it from you, and they
And the
don't even
ones that,
ask you. I love those the most. Those that don't even have any question at the beginning. They just want to test you, and they want to see what are you going to talk about. And then when they see that,
sure.
okay, this guy knows his stuff, then they'll start talking. Okay, so how about this? How about that? But at the beginning, they're just. But what I love, sometimes even more, is the people who actually share their story, because many times they're going to give their own answers during that, and I'll just have to confirm for them, right? It's here in the chart as well. And many
Yeah.
times we have a 30-minute session, I'll go 40 minutes even. We have an hour session. Sometimes I've gone all the way to 1 hour and 20 minutes, and sometimes people are like, oh, my hour is up. I'm like, don't worry about it. Like, I'm not in a rush anywhere. Like, I'm not going, oh,
Yeah.
you need to book another hour if you want to spend 10 more
I
minutes.
do the same thing, because it just feels too artificial. And all my guitar teachers were like that too, learning guitar. I remember the
Right.
most exaggerated was I discovered that my classical teacher in college, if I booked the last lesson of the day with him, we would be there like 3 or 4 hours, because
Right.
he's so passionate about teaching
Mm-hmm.
that. And so I got these like 3-4 hour lessons like every week.
Yeah. Yeah.
you know
Especially if the chart is engaging, like, I'll go for an hour after you book half an hour. I shouldn't really be saying this.
Oh yeah, right, yeah. Oops.
But like, it's just out of pure passion of doing it. And I see some of these astrologers on YouTube that have this disgusting thing going on, and I'm going to call it disgusting because it is.
Okay.
Because it's not about giving other astrologers a shot. It's about making money, really, and it's about they have bullshit astrology. And I'm going to be very blunt about this. They have bullshit
Go ahead.
astrology. The one that they promote is bullshit astrology.
Yeah.
The astrologers they have these websites where they have like 20 astrologers offering readings, and they sometimes make videos with them on their channel and whatnot. Their astrology is all bullshit. Their prices are high. They offer all these readings like complex spiritual progressed chart reading. Like, you're going to dedicate an hour to reading someone's progressed chart. Like, where are you going to, what on earth are you going to tell them if they're not interested in like learning what the progressed chart is, and unless you're teaching them astrology, what are you going to tell them, right? So I look at these things, and I this is kind of where I understand your frustration and your disappointment. And I'm disappointed in this. But then there's the other side where I think, well, this is kind of, the Coca-Cola age of astrology in a way. This is really helping astrology. So I'm not thinking in terms, well, these people are getting a lot of attention, and the clients don't really know that these people are not good at what they do, basically, and they're giving them money. And I could be spiteful. Well, why don't they come to me and pay me money for that, right?
Sure.
And get real answers. I could have that. That stance toward it. But then I think it's not about that. It's about the fact that these people do make money, but they're promoting astrology. That's the important thing. They're promoting astrology as a whole, not my astrology, not their astrology, not someone else's astrology, but astrology as a whole. And if they're spending money in like Facebook ads and making a presence on the social media in the name of astrology, I'm happy to see that. But again, bullshit technique, too much money charged, and all of this stuff, which I'm sure that will go away after we reestablish metaphysics as a respectable, branch of science and society.
Yeah, that would be good, because I run into so many, when I was on social media, I ran into so many people who had like egregiously misunderstood basic metaphysical doctrines and like laws of the universe. Like and when you misunderstand this stuff, it either makes you feel, it either like boosts your ego in a really dangerous way, so you feel like really powerful and highly spiritual, or it makes you like very afraid of what's happening, and right. a lot of that has to do with karma. Like people, how many times have you heard somebody be like, oh, karma, like karma's a bitch, karma, oh, the nodes are karma, chiron, very karmic. And it's like, you don't understand what karma is, because karma is totally neutral. There's no good or bad karma. That's a value judgment. Or and everything is karma. Everything has to do with karma.
Exactly. Where I facepalm the most is like people sending me synastry. Is this a karmic relationship?
Oh
like
my gosh.
Do you know of any other kind of relationship? What other kind of relationship is there? Like, is this a karmic thing? Well, of course it's a karmic thing. What are you talking about?
Of course.
Who's spreading this stuff?
I know. I wish people would figure out, would understand on a wider basis how karma really works, because it would actually help them in their everyday life, not just because I'm an intellectual snob, which I am, but because it's like, no, like if you really understand karma, you'll actually be able to live more aware, like like I keep talking about. So I wish people could figure out a different word. Like, what do they actually mean when they're saying that? They mean something like, is this relationship
bad, like, and really at the core?
Well, I think they're looking for like a soulmate thing, which is really about like, is this relationship a profound, dynamic, energetic interchange or something?
But even that is going to be karmic as well. So.
Oh, well, yeah, of course. But I think that's what they're really getting at. Like, is this a relationship that could, where the relationship could unlock new psychomental, spiritual potentials and radically alter our lives for the better, kind of thing,
Right. Definitely.
And it's like, well, probably not. No, I'm just kind of joking, because I feel like there's very few people on the planet who actually have a relationship like that,
Yeah.
And when people think they have it, they're really just in like a highly toxic, dysfunctional relationship where they keep breaking up and getting back together because they're lonely and the sex is great or something. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Lars, this was a very interesting can of worms to open up with you today.
Yeah. Thanks.
This is a long video. We're at 2 hours.
Yeah.
We're at 2 hours right now. So whenever in the future, whenever you guys see a video with me and Lars posted on this channel, you gotta expect 2-3 hours. Various cans of worms opened up. So yeah, Lars, thanks very much for joining me today. I guess we better close this.
All right, sounds good. Thanks for having me.
I'm not sure if YouTube allows 8-hour uploads anymore, but all right. So thanks very much, and thanks to everyone who is still here after 2 hours, which is not going to be many people, but thanks for watching. If you want to find Lars for consultations, to speak to him about anything that you've heard in this video today, we're going to have his website linked down below. Till the next time, peace.